My name is Elias Mercer, and at 42, I once believed that loyalty could be bought with stability, that love could be secured by sacrifice, and that presence could be replaced by provision if the numbers were large enough and the lifestyle comfortable enough. A belief that grew from years of grinding through the upper ranks of a freight coordination firm, where time zones blurred together, where mornings began before sunrise and nights ended with spreadsheets glowing on hotel desks in cities I barely registered, where I convinced myself that missing anniversaries, skipping family dinners, and spending weeks away from home were necessary investments in the future I was building for the woman I loved, a woman named Serena Hale, whom I thought understood that the life we shared in our quiet development outside of Oak Ridge, Illinois, was the reward for all that exhaustion, for all that distance, for every night I collapsed into unfamiliar beds while she slept alone beneath the roof I paid for. A roof over a wide cream-colored house framed by tall sycamores that rustled in the wind like applause for a life I assumed was perfect. Because when I came home, she was there, smiling, warm, glowing, wrapping herself around me as though she had been waiting all week just for that moment, whispering affectionate jokes, pulling me upstairs before I could even drop my suitcase. And for a long time I thought that urgency was proof of devotion, proof that everything I was doing was right, proof that the contract between us was unbreakable. Serena had once worked in event branding, but 7 years into our marriage she stepped away, explaining that my income was enough for both of us and that she wanted to dedicate herself fully to the life we were building. And I welcomed the idea because it felt like trust, like partnership, like the kind of domestic harmony people wrote about in glossy lifestyle magazines, where dinner parties glowed with candlelight, neighbors laughed over wine, weekend escapes led us through vineyard roads, and our kitchen became a sanctuary for long conversations that stretched well past midnight, conversations that wandered from memories to fantasies to nothing at all. Until one evening, almost without warning, something shifted, so subtly that I ignored it at first. Because denial is easy when the alternative threatens everything you believe. And the first time she turned away from me in bed, murmuring that she was tired, I told myself it was just stress, just a fleeting moment. But the second time, when her voice carried a distance I couldn't name, I began to feel the quiet forming, and by the third, when her body stiffened and her eyes avoided mine, I sensed that something far more serious was taking shape beneath the surface of our marriage. Soon, the excuses stacked up like fragile walls built to hide a crumbling foundation, each one thin, each one rehearsed, headaches, fatigue, vague discomforts that always seemed to arise at the exact moment I reached for her. And though she suggested closeness in theory, in practice she positioned herself at the edge of the bed, leaving a gulf between us that felt wider than any ocean I had crossed for work. And I began lying awake beside her, studying her profile in the dim glow of the alarm clock, searching for the woman who once leaned into my stories, who once laughed at my bad jokes, who once greeted me like a long-lost traveler returning from war. And I told myself it was a phase, that all couples experienced this, that monotony and routine were natural enemies of passion, that my constant travel had finally worn us thin. But deep inside I felt the quiet whisper of doubt beginning to grow louder each night I pretended not to hear it. The turning point arrived on the eve of a trip to Port Haven, when Serena moved through the bedroom humming softly, a sound I hadn't heard in months, her steps light, her energy strangely buoyant. And as I zipped my bag I remarked on her good mood, only to watch her shoulders tense as if she had been caught in something she hadn't meant to reveal, quickly brushing off my comment with an excuse about productivity. Yet when I glanced up, I caught her studying herself in the mirror with a small, secret smile that had nothing to do with me. And in that moment, a cold realization settled into my chest, that her excitement was tied not to my presence but to my absence. And for the first time, I sensed that my leaving no longer created longing, but relief, a realization that lingered like smoke long after the room had gone quiet. Patterns soon emerged, and unlike emotions, patterns cannot be reasoned away, because I had spent my career tracing inefficiencies, spotting fractures in complex systems before they collapsed, And now I was seeing the same red flags inside my own home, watching as new behaviors accumulated like warning signs on a long highway. A gym membership she had resisted for years. New clothing I had never seen, delicate and unfamiliar. Her phone buzzing with messages she took into other rooms. Returning flushed, claiming distant relatives or forgotten friends, excuses that didn't align with her expressions, with the guarded way she held her device. And once, when I entered the office unexpectedly, she snapped her laptop shut so fast it startled both of us, laughing nervously about watching silly videos, even though she had never hidden such things from me before. And in those moments I felt something inside me fracture, not loudly, but deeply. Calls from the road became painful rituals, my voice reaching across hundreds of miles only to meet clipped responses, practical concerns replacing affection, small talk replacing warmth. And sometimes I heard unfamiliar sounds behind her voice, music she never played, television shows she never watched, once even a low murmur that stopped abruptly when I questioned it. And though she brushed it off as background noise, my instincts screamed that something was wrong, that I was being edited out of my own life. And the final crack in the illusion appeared when I discovered a receipt for an expensive dinner I had not attended, dated during a week I was out of state. And when I confronted her, her explanation felt rehearsed, too smooth, too fragile, collapsing under the weight of a single follow-up question, her defensiveness confirming everything I had been afraid to admit. Days later, a canceled meeting sent me home early, and instead of rerouting my schedule as I normally would, I chose to return unannounced, craving truth more than comfort, rehearsing scenarios that might restore my faith. Yet when I pulled into the driveway and saw a sleek, unfamiliar car parked where only mine should be, my body reacted before my mind could, every instinct warning me that I was about to lose something I could never regain. And as I stepped inside, the air itself felt wrong. Unfamiliar scents lingering, the atmosphere charged with something foreign, and then I heard it, unmistakable, coming from upstairs, sounds that shattered the last piece of denial I clung to, leaving me standing frozen in my own entryway, the life I thought I knew collapsing around me like glass. A strange calm settled over me as I moved, not in rage but in focus, as though I were stepping into a crisis at work, analyzing, controlling, planning. And when I reached the hallway outside the bedroom and glimpsed Serena entwined with a man I had never seen, her face alive in a way it had not been with me for months, I felt a pain sharper than any physical wound, not because of the act itself, but because she looked happier than she had been in my arms. And in that moment, something inside me hardened, the part that once sought reconciliation now seeking only control, and I retreated silently, already deciding how this would end. Downstairs, I prepared myself, gathering proof, positioning myself where they would see me, letting time stretch until their laughter drifted down the stairs, until casual conversation confirmed that my absence had become their opportunity. And when they finally saw me, the shock on Serena's face mirrored the realization that the mask had fallen, that the life she had hidden could no longer exist. And in that silent standoff, I understood that love, once broken, transforms into something colder, something sharper, something that no longer seeks to heal, only to resolve. Their fear was immediate, palpable, and as I spoke, my voice carried a calm I did not recognize, extracting truth piece by piece, learning how long, how often, how deeply I had been replaced, each answer carving a deeper wound, yet strengthening my resolve, because clarity, even when brutal, is still clarity. And in that clarity I discovered the version of myself that would no longer accept betrayal quietly, the version that understood that endings are not always loud, but they are always final. And in the space where love once lived, something else began to grow, something forged not from heartbreak, but from understanding, a realization that trust cannot survive deception, that loyalty cannot be assumed, and that sometimes the only way forward is through the wreckage of what you once believed, carrying nothing but the truth of who you have become in its place. The days that followed unfolded with a precision that felt surreal, as if my life had shifted into a parallel version where emotion no longer dictated my decisions, and every action was measured by consequence rather than attachment. And Serena, once the center of my world, now moved through the house like a stranger awaiting eviction, her presence heavy with unspoken regret and fear, while I watched from a distance, no longer reacting, no longer bargaining with what had already been proven. Because the truth had burned away the illusion of who she was, leaving only what remained when trust was stripped bare. And though she pleaded for forgiveness, for counseling, for a second chance built on promises I had already seen shattered, I understood that some fractures do not heal, they only spread, and the longer they are ignored, the deeper they carve into the foundation of everything you are trying to protect. Legal documents arrived swiftly, signatures replacing vows, and within days, the life we had built together was dismantled piece by piece, her belongings reduced to suitcases and boxes that lined the hallway like monuments to a history that no longer existed, while I stood in the kitchen watching sunlight stretch across the floor where laughter once lived, feeling neither triumph nor grief, only a steady, unwavering certainty that what I was doing was necessary. Because to remain would be to surrender to a version of myself that accepted betrayal as the cost of companionship, and I refused to pay that price again, even if it meant walking forward alone into an unfamiliar future where comfort had to be rebuilt from nothing but resolve. Serena eventually left without ceremony, her car disappearing down the street with no dramatic farewell, no final words worth remembering, just the quiet hum of an ending that had already happened long before she packed her things. And as the door closed behind her, I felt an unexpected stillness settle over the house, not emptiness, but space, as though the walls themselves had been waiting for the truth to free them from the tension they had silently held for months. And in that stillness, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried beneath routine and obligation, pieces of identity that had nothing to do with being a husband or provider, but everything to do with being whole again. Whispers spread, as they always do, fragments of truth reshaped into stories that traveled through social circles, and though I did not seek sympathy, it found me in quiet nods and awkward conversations, while others kept their distance, unsure how to engage with someone who had faced such a fracture and emerged visibly altered. Yet none of that mattered as much as the internal shift taking place, the slow rebuilding of self-respect brick by brick. The realization that the life I lost was not the one I needed to mourn, but the version of myself who believed love alone could protect him from deception. Work changed too, not because my role was different, but because I was, and colleagues noticed the edge in my focus, the sharpened clarity in negotiations, the way I no longer hesitated when making decisions that once would have required reassurance, because betrayal had stripped away the luxury of naivety, replacing it with awareness. And while some saw it as coldness, I recognized it as survival. A recalibration of boundaries that ensured I would never again mistake comfort for commitment or silence for honesty. Evenings became moments of reflection rather than longing, bourbon replacing wine, quiet replacing conversation. And in the absence of Serena's voice, I learned to listen to my own, discovering that solitude, when chosen, is not loneliness but freedom, a space where clarity thrives, where wounds begin to close not through denial but through acceptance. And though memories occasionally surfaced like ghosts in the corners of rooms, they no longer held power over me, because I had reclaimed the narrative of my life, rewriting it not as a story of loss, but as one of awakening. Dadding eventually returned to my life, not as a search for replacement, but as an exploration of connection built on transparency rather than illusion. And though trust did not come easily, it came honestly, tested by patience rather than assumption. And in each new interaction, I measured not charm or beauty, but integrity, because attraction fades, but character reveals itself in moments of pressure. And I had learned the cost of ignoring those signs far too late once before. The house transformed alongside me, furniture rearranged, colors changed, spaces reclaimed, as if the environment itself mirrored the renewal happening within, and with each small alteration, I felt the past loosen its grip, making room for experiences that no longer carried the weight of deception. Because healing is not a single moment of realization, but a series of choices made daily, each one reinforcing the belief that self-worth must never be negotiated away. Looking back, I no longer see the years with Serena as wasted, but as necessary chapters in a story that taught me the depth of my own resilience. And though the lesson came wrapped in pain, it also delivered strength, clarity, and a renewed understanding of what love must be built upon to endure. Because loyalty cannot survive in secrecy, and trust cannot grow where honesty is absent. I now move forward not hardened but aware, not bitter but resolute, carrying the knowledge that true partnership demands more than presence, more than comfort, more than routine. It demands truth, courage, and mutual respect. And without those, even the most beautiful life can collapse beneath its own weight, leaving behind only the opportunity to begin again, wiser than before. And so, the man who once believed that sacrifice alone could secure devotion no longer exists, replaced by someone who understands that love must be chosen daily, protected through integrity, and anchored in honesty, because anything less is not a partnership, but an illusion waiting to shatter, and I will never again confuse the two.